Welcome back. My name is Key Tyler. Subscribe. If you haven't been here before, I talk about the astrological events of our life in evolutionary astrology terms. I wanted to bring to light Saturn in retrograde because it did already occur, right? We oftentimes will bring out a forecast on the day that it's occurring or a couple days before, or some people even put it out a month before. And what we realize is that we release that information, but it doesn't really sink in until we start to feel the intensities of what the planets actually bring. So what I wanted to talk about now, while we're in the meat of things, is how Saturn in retrograde ends November 14th. So we've got a couple months of this energy around particular aspects, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. But I wanted to really bring to light the importance of it actually bearing fruit in February 18th, 2025 to be exact. So while this is a 4-month period, I'm going to show you and explain why we still have this phase of shadow to get through. And by shadow, I mean things not really looking the way that we want them to, things not feeling very great. It's kind of like the muck of things, you know what I mean? So to get started, I really want to bring the lens out a little bit, because we talk about these planetary aspects, but sometimes I don't think people realize the depth that one planet can bring. Saturn is an outer planet. It is the very first planet that begins the outer planets. The outer planets are those that are Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and of course Pluto, which is in the Kuiper belt. We consider all of these planets to be generational, if you will, because it covers a longer cycle of time. So with these planets, if you observe them, if you're an astrologer, or if you just are somebody who studies time or history, you'll start to see that these planets move along with a larger scope of time. So with Saturn, it goes in cycles of 7 years, and the full cycle will complete itself in 28 years. That is why people have a Saturn return at that time, where it returns to the same sign as your birth. But every 7 years, we incrementally change, evolve, and grow into something more mature, something more polished, something more pronounced. You know what I mean? But what does Saturn actually bring? People say Saturn is this very difficult planet, but difficulty kind of exists everywhere in our lives. I'm putting the slides up here so that you can kind of get a visual of these words that I'm talking about. But Saturn brings to us rules, regulations, politics to be exact, laws that can be man-made laws versus natural laws. Both of them fall under Saturn's influence. Authority and authority figures, public figures, the test of life, the test of taking a test. Do you pass the test? Do you get your degree? The hard work and discipline that it takes in our lives to get to a place where we are our own authority, are creating our own cycles instead of being kind of overshadowed by what society thinks or the way that we were shown to be. Saturn really wants to help agitate us in some certain way. It elevates us, but it agitates us to grow and mature, so that we can really step into ourselves and be the most mature form of who we are. So yes, difficulty, right. But what comes after difficulty? Generally, a good lesson is learned. You don't repeat the hardships over and over again, hopefully. But Saturn also represents history. So Saturn is a deviant little planet. It makes everybody run for the hills. Everybody's always so scared about what Saturn's going to bring. The cycle of Saturn brings something new to our awareness every 7 years. We generally phase out of something. And this phase could be relying on something that no longer fits. When it comes to authority in our lives, maybe we realize that certain people no longer fit the bill. They're no longer people that we look up to. So if you think about the cycles of 7 years of life, 7 is generally the age where we learn our most important things and what stays with us through the age of 14 and on. Saturn return happens at 27 to 28 years. And at that time, you are coming into a phase of your life where you are facing all of the things that society has told you, everything that your parents have told you, and school. And you're trying to come up out of that as the most natural, the most disciplined, the most mature person you could potentially be. And in a nutshell, that's what Saturn is trying to bring to us. It shows us the longer cycles, and it also displays to us that history repeats itself, that cycles come back around, and we have to address maybe some things that we thought we already put to bed. but they kind of have evolved into something else that we still have to deal with at a fundamental level. So I think those words can bring you into the energy of, oh, so Saturn is the authority, but it's also your natural authority. With Saturn being in Pisces, we are more concerned. So the Saturn influence, when it comes to, its prominence in our lives, what we're focused on when it's in the sign of Pisces is nature, what is untouched and untamed, the abundance of all people, acceptance of all kinds of races, religions, demographics, locations in the world. These are all things that are huge with the sign of Pisces, because Pisces wants it's the group, it's all of us, it's the masses. So when we consider Saturn and Pisces, we're trying to see how we can get better as a collective. It's a very collective sign, Pisces. But Pisces also brings this compassion and acceptance, but also this sense of chaos. It brings neglect. It can bring things that are spontaneous, but also come out of nowhere and catch us off guard. Being caught off guard can lead to a low immune system, can lead to stress, can lead to overwork and overuse. So Pisces also brings these energies. They are the fish above the water and the fish below the water. So we're having both experiences simultaneously. And Saturn says, yes, this is the way it is. But what do we really want to do when Saturn is in retrograde? Okay. Well, Saturn stays in Pisces for a full 2 years. It's in retrograde for 4 months. Now, this will occur again in 2025 when Saturn is in Aries and then goes retrograde. So this energy is not going to come up again in the same way, although it will. The signs that might be mostly affected, if you have birthdays in mutable signs, so that is Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces, okay? But the birthdays that are going to really be affected, and I say this because I'm going to show you in a minute here, the degrees. So it's the degrees that we're measuring as astrologers, that we're measuring as timekeepers, that are bringing the most impactful times for potential people, right? So if we're thinking about mutable signs, Pisces is a mutable sign, Saturn is in a mutable sign, so they are going to be heavily influencing mutable kinds of people. Whether you have a moon or a sun, we're all going to be affected a little differently. But just if you've got a lot of mutability in your chart, you will feel this, even if I don't name the birthdays here that I mentioned. So Gemini birthdays from the 2nd to the 9th, Virgo birthdays from the 4th to the 11th, Sagittarius birthdays from the 3rd to the 10th, and Pisces birthdays from the 2nd to the 9th. So here I have the Saturn retrograde cycle in Pisces for the rest of this year, and the cycle that will be ending in the beginning of next year. So if we look here at the very top left-hand corner of the photo here, we can see that Saturn's peak degree started at 12 degrees. Now, that's not something that you would know directly unless you kind of fast forwarded your time clock and you looked ahead a little bit to see that this 12 degrees was a very pivotal moment. What I wanted to bring to light here is an important date, March 23rd, 2024, because that is the day where Saturn was at 12 degrees, and that becomes the peak degree for the cycle that we are going through. So starting at the beginning, you see Saturn at 12 degrees and it's direct. And as it passes over 13, 14, 15 degrees, by the time it gets to 19 degrees, it retrogrades, in which it did on June 29th. Now it's going to continue to go throughout its cycle. And on November 14th, it's going to go direct at 12 degrees. This is why the 12 degrees is so important for this interpretation. So if you can think about what was happening March 23rd, 2024, just like get that in your brain, because I'm going to start bringing up some things that happened and maybe you will feel the impact of the influence. Like, oh yeah, I was doing this and I was thinking this. If that's the case, then these things will generally come up again. They'll come up in, I'd say, a more personal way. The way that you were looking at it before is now being asked to be looked at completely different. So I'm just seeing a lot of things with where people are experiencing out in the world and in their personal lives, things they never thought would happen. And maybe they thought it would happen, but people around them are kind of like a little flabbergasted, like, whoa, what's happening here? This is kind of moving a little fast. Now, going back to the chart, so this peak degree, it happens at 12 degrees on November 14th, 2024. That is when Saturn comes out of retrograde. Yay, right? But what I think people fail to mention is that there is a shadow phase. We've got to go back around all those degrees once again. That finishes on February 18th, 2025. That is when it exits its shadow at 19 degrees. So if you have 12 degrees, 19 degrees in your chart in a mutable sign or in the mutable houses, you're going to really feel a shakeup in your life. So let's kind of go over some of the things that have happened so far as you see kind of the phases that we go through during this kind of cycle. So on March 23rd, it's the beginning of the American primary presidential election. So it's not only America that's beginning these election cycles. It is Sweden, it is the Finnish, the Iranian, the Salvadorian, the Pakistani. So everybody is kind of going into this evolutionary phase in their life where they are looking at new people to bring to the forefront, to take over, to lead the country, to be an authority, to be a fixer. That's what Saturn is. Saturn's bringing all of these things to our awareness because we're seeing, hey, this isn't working. We are looking for somebody who can give us some life, right? And also at this time, Sweden joins NATO. And you know, it's where people are coming together. It's where people are learning what side of the fence they are on. So where were you on March 23rd? Were you on the side of the fence? Were you looking at people that you wanted to elect or not elect? Or were there people in your organizations who got promoted or demoted? And you're just like, so maybe some curiousness happened around this time. Maybe there was a little speculation. But here, when it comes to June 29th, when Saturn actually goes retrograde, a lot of things actually happen. This is why it's important to not always take the specific day as the only occurrence, because some of these things happened within 5 days in which the degrees are still heavy, but we needed more time for these events to roll out. You know what I'm saying? So Britain elects their first left liberal leaning candidate in 14 years. Whoa, right? Didn't we just talk about how you will fundamentally go one way for a long time and then retrograde will happen and you will flip the script? And that's what these people did. They chose someone that was more aligned with their current values. I think I read that they were just tired of having such a conservative government that they just wanted to feel something different. They wanted someone else to pump some newness into their government, into their leadership. So I thought that was pretty pronounced. And I don't know how much of you guys actually know about the Chevron doctrine. So by a vote of 6-3, the justices overruled a landmark 1984 decision where there was a Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. So the court decision, it gave rise to what's known as the Chevron doctrine. And a lot of people have been talking about it, but it's a little difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to just narrowly focus it to the fact that when there was a company that was in the center of a dispute and someone took this company to court, the courts would actually deflect all of the interpretations of the laws on an actual agency. So it is basically a third party coming in to make sense of the laws that were written, things that were made too ambiguous. They make them more obvious. They do a little bit more research. And what that allowed was the court systems to go through these decisions on whether it was natural resources or whether people were abusing the natural world. Or this company had come under scrutiny for abusing natural resources. They go to court, and what the courts have decided, what this court case actually tried to implement, and which it did, is the fact that if Congress has not directly addressed the question at the center of the dispute, the court was required to uphold an agency's interpretation of the statute as long as it was reasonable. It goes from the courts not making the final decision. It goes through the third-party agencies that are making the decisions and interpreting the laws that are sometimes favorable or unfavorable of whatever company is having a court issue. So basically what this allowed in 1985, all of these court cases were going very quickly. And I think that there was absolutely an abuse of power when it came to this. I think a lot of companies were able to do whatever they wanted because these agencies could potentially do and say things that were in their favor. And I think that's why this was overturned. Unfortunately, what it brings is hardship in the court system, because you're now facing these people who know the law, but they don't know all of the laws, ins and outs. They're not studying every single branch of law, and everything that goes along with it, as one person. So when they're having to look at these cases and they're having to make decisions, they're not coming from a place of really knowing. They're coming from a place of just doing what they can to interpret the quickest that they can. And this leaves a lot of hangups in courts. This leaves people and companies being subject to not having the things that they need. And issues being prolonged for a period of time. We don't know what's going to happen November 14th, 2024. But what occurs generally is, for the United States, it's 7 days after the US presidential election. That's usually a time where people are upset or excited. And we'll have to see how that rolls out until February. But what I can say is that in February, historically, the presidential inauguration happens on January 20th, 2025. And just know that right after that, policy changes happen rapidly after that. They are rushing to reverse all the things that the last administration had enacted, and they do it with a quickness. So we're going to see a lot of rules changing. We're going to see a lot of movement. I wanted to bring up this chart because I think that we can talk about it a little deeper here. Now, when Saturn went into retrograde, it was happening when the sun was square the moon. So that square kind of brings this challenge. But also there's a trine to Venus. So maybe there is a little give. Maybe we're going to find some common ground. But with Saturn in retrograde in the fourth house, I don't think that people find commonality. I don't think that people felt as if they were together. I think there's a great division that people are seeing. And the maturity level of some of the people that we're watching or maybe witnessing in our home life, it's very dismal. The maturity is low. And I think what we were seeing here on this day is this feeling of something else has to give. Someone else needs to step up. Who's going to step up? And then there's questions of who's going to step down. Someone needs to step down. And I'm sure that's happening not only in the larger scope of our presidential elections, but it's most definitely happening in our personal lives too, right? Like roles are reversing. Maybe you're not going to be the breadwinner anymore. Maybe they're going to be the breadwinner, and you're going to have to sit down and figure out your stuff. You know what I'm saying? So this is the kind of energy. I think on the day of Saturn retrograde, when it went retrograde, I think we were feeling a loss collectively with Cancer in the 8th house. I think we were feeling as if there's a level of unsafety, uncertainty, and scrutiny. We'll throw another S word in there, speculation. We're all speculating about what potentially could happen, but we actually don't really know. And that's what leaves us feeling unsafe and divided. When Saturn comes out of retrograde, the sun and moon will be opposing each other. So we go from a square to an opposition. Now, the opposition is this push-pull. You're no longer going from this battle of trying to come together. You're almost directly opposed to one another, right? So there's almost further division, according to even what the charts are showing us, just a further divide in degrees. With Uranus there, exactly at 25 degrees retrograde, it's still there, but the moon is there. So really, we are personally wanting to upgrade our situation in life, and we are just hoping that someone will fit the bill. Will we fit the bill for our own lives? But more so, how will our leaders actually represent us? How will we be represented? What's also interesting is Jupiter and Mercury are opposed. So when Saturn comes out of retrograde, there's a lot of opposition going on. There's a lot of turmoil. People are going to be divided. People are going to feel like they hadn't been heard. There's just going to be a high level of disappointment, I think, because that's just kind of what happens when we don't get what we want, when we don't get what we see or think needs to occur because that's what's going to better everybody's lives. But everybody's not having the same experience. So it kind of makes it hard to make it something that works for everybody when there's so many different views, so many different thought processes. And our country is very large. So to incorporate everybody's thought process into one person or into one ideal, it's never going to work, right? We have to learn to embrace all and everything and come up with ways to protect all of us in that process. And I think that's essentially where some of those energies are lying real hard. You know what I mean? Now, we did talk about Mercury coming out of retrograde, and that it will go back through the degree phases that it once was going through earlier in the year. I wanted to talk about this because I thought it was a very positive forward movement. We know that things are going to get a little more tumultuous than we want them to be. But what's going to occur when Saturn comes out of shadow, February 18th, we're looking at the chart here and we're seeing that the sun and the moon are now making a trine aspect. So we went from challenging square to opposing planets in an opposition with a full moon. Full moons are pretty wild. But with this trine, we're looking for a softening. And in fact, this is the energy that does incorporate and encompass more ideas and more people, making us all a congealed, put together group of people. So Saturn will be at this healthy 19 degrees. It will finally be moving out of its shadow phase. And I think we're going to be coming to a phase where we're learning to trust each other, learning to trust the differences that are within all of us. With this Mars in retrograde in Cancer in the 4th house, it actually goes retrograde in the sign of Leo. And there goes that leadership. We're bringing it back, trying to figure out how this leader is actually going to step in and fill in the shoes of improving and moving a country forward. But when it is in the sign of Cancer, we're really thinking about, okay, do I feel safe? Do I feel like we're together as a family? Can I find myself amongst the people that I look at? And I think that's what people will be wanting to see. They'll be moving around to look for that. And I think that a lot of people are making decisions that work best for them, moving out of the country if that's the risk they want to take. But I see that there is quite a bit of movement in this chart. And I say that because it seems as if everybody's wanting the opportunity to experience something outside of their normal scope. And they just want to feel a certain level of acceptance. They want to stop moving so hard, working so hard. The energies of this day really reflect to me this idea of softening, of releasing, coming to grips with what is happening. So it seems like there will be a little easier of a time. However, we're really looking to develop a level of safety, it looks like. And we're going to really want to be way more informed than we ever were. You're going to want to take the information that you get with a grain of salt, right? And if you hadn't been doing that already, you should. With Saturn in retrograde, we are most definitely going to see a lot of people who are talking and not walking their walk. You're going to see a lot of people fall from grace. You will see a lot of people fall into forms of deception because they're just unwilling to change and shift and include more people in the game. I do think that we fundamentally, with this Saturn retrograde cycle, we're trying to understand more deeply who represents us. Are we aligned with those values? Does that seem like us? Are we following the masses, the herd, the consensus mind frame, or are we going out on a ledge? Are we going towards our natural inclinations? Are we standing on the side of what we think is authority, what we think is genuine, what we think is representing who we are? That is the period of this time. So personally, you could be going through a lot. You could have Saturn in Pisces. If you have Saturn in a mutable sign, you're going to see things move and shake, but you will have to get a reading in order to find out how that's directly affecting you, where it falls in your chart, and what other planets are involved in that cycle. So if you are looking to get a reading, I would love to give you one. You can visit my website, astrologyinthewild.com. You can most definitely book yourself an appointment, and we can talk about if you're having a Saturn return. I hope, Gen Z, I hope you're having an okay time. I'm really on your side, and I see you making moves. I see you shaking in the world, and I'm so super proud of y'all. And for anybody else who's my mom is having a Saturn return. She's in her 50s and she's doing so amazing in her personal life. She went from, it being kind of difficult to it feeling like she can take more action in her own life. And um, as a 50-something-year-old woman, that feels good. And I'm super proud of her. I know a lot of people who uh, are experiencing really good moments in their life, even though there are some crazy things happening out in the world. So, my mainstay is always like, well, what is the positive that we can pull out of this whole thing? And I really think with the retrograde motion, because it's an outer planet, we get the opportunity to go really deep within ourselves, and we get to really do the shadow work with things that make us feel extremely uncomfortable, people that make us feel extremely uncomfortable, and being represented in a way that doesn't feel authentic and wanting to do something about it. And that's what I hope this brings forward for a lot of us. We all are at some point needing to step into a better version of ourselves, right? This is always this cliche thought process, but with Saturn involved, it absolutely is. We're coming into some really astronomical times, as things fall away and things change. I just want to let you know that there are positive things coming forward. And so if you are feeling the call to step into something new, if you're feeling the call to let things fall away and just be your natural self, it is a really good time to do that. And I'm super proud of you for taking the risk. I hope you all have a beautiful, enlivening week. Remember, this isn't all bad news. These are things to plan for. So put these dates in your calendar. Look for November 14th. Remember that it's mirroring March 23rd. Remember February 18th. And remember that things will get a little better, a little easier, a little, things will feel like they're a little more on your side. Try not to get too lost in it. You know what I mean? Okay. Peace out.